So today we're going to talk to worship teams and worship directors about something that is extremely important and personal to me. This video actually was one of the hardest ones I've ever had to do, and I've had to pray the most about how to approach it. But I want to start out by saying this. Worship teams, I see what you do. You guys work really hard, and you put your heart into it and your passion into it. And what you do is so important. So before we begin, please know how valuable that we know and I know you are, and how much I really appreciate you being here to listen to what it's like for people like me who have sensory overload issues. Disability inclusion in ministries, sensory overload, and worship. So today we're going to talk about sensory overload in regards to worship environments. Now, people can experience sensory overload at any church, so this is a great video for everyone. But particularly if you are part of a church who regularly puts together concert-level worship productions, then this information is going to be even more valuable for you, because there can be a lot of sensory stimulation here, and it's important to understand how different people may experience this. And in this case, how people with sensory issues experience these services can sometimes keep them out of church. So let's start with what sensory overload is and what it is not. Sensory overload is when your brain cannot process the amount of input that is coming from your senses. This can be from a combination of senses or even just one that feels really intense. Either way, what it means is the brain becomes overstimulated, and often it can trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response. And while this can happen to anyone, it's more common in people with hidden disabilities, such as those on the autism spectrum, those with ADHD, PTSD, anxiety, and more. What sensory overload is not is just feeling annoyed by something you don't like or wishing that a style of music was different. This may make someone feel disappointed, but their brain is still able to process things like usual. So sensory processing issues is something that I deal with. And if you're someone who has never experienced sensory overload, I kind of wanted to walk you through what that experience felt like. So for me, when I go to a church that has really, really loud volume, and especially if there's also really bright streaming lights and flashing lights, and those type of things, it can be a really difficult experience. The first thing that happens when I walk up to the worship center doors and I open it, if that volume just comes like swooshing out all over me, it almost feels like it knocks me down. Like I feel really bad. If I feel like I want to try to make it through the worship, at that point I go to my seat. If things don't get better, like I don't acclimate or the volume doesn't kind of settle down, what happens next is I'll start to suddenly feel like a really irrational, angry feeling like right here. It almost feels like a hot red anger. It just comes on for no reason. And I think that is probably that fight response that we get in that fight, flight, and freeze. But when I feel that, that is a sign to me that I am not going to be able to make it through the worship. It's just too much sensory input. So 9 times out of 10, I will then immediately leave and go to the foyer. On the rare occasion that I have not been able to leave a church worship service that was overwhelming, what's happened to me is I have completely shut down. That's the freeze. And when that happens, usually I put my head down like this, I will close my eyes, and I'm literally just trying to get through it. But most of the time when I'm in a situation in a church where I feel overwhelmed by the sensory input, I go to the foyer. That's the flight. I just run away as fast as I can. And if you haven't experienced this, I want you to really stop and think about what this feels like. Because the truth is, when you go to the foyer and you sit there by yourself, you're not going there because you want to be there. You're going there because you cannot be part of the worship with everyone else. And the way that makes me feel is like, I don't belong here. It makes me feel like there's something really wrong with me and that I shouldn't be part of this place. It feels really terrible. And it does not puts you in a place where you feel like you're ready to go in and listen to the sermon, and to get anything out of it, you just feel bad. So I think that's really important to understand, that the worship is really important, but not just what the music is, but also that people feel like they can be included in it. There's one more important thing to understand about these fight, flight, and freeze feelings. Did you know that up to 90% of people on the autism spectrum have sensory issues too? Which means for those individuals who are nonverbal, when they feel overwhelmed by their environment, they can't tell anyone. So they become trapped in an unmanageable situation. And just in the same way we all would, when things become unbearable, their feelings may come out in behavior, like either shutting down or acting out. When churches do not address this reality by offering options or adaptations, or just simply turning things down, this means that many people with hidden disabilities and their families will not be able to be part of your church. And since the Great Commission asks us to reach everyone, this is something that we need to do something about. So what can your church do to help? First, take an objective look and ask if sensory overload could be a bigger issue at your church than you realize. You can start by asking these. Who isn't part of your Sunday worship crowd? If you look around and you don't see people who have disabilities like autism, why not? Who sits in the foyer each week until worship is over? And when was the last time someone asked them why? What is your average decibel range? Is it in the potential danger zone? What about your lighting? Would it be safe for people who have photosensitive epilepsy? Do you have any worship options or adaptations for people with sensory issues, or do you just expect that they can go somewhere else? If you feel that your worship set may not be as inclusive as you thought, take the next step. Ask those who have sensory issues or other disabilities to share what is hard and what is helpful for them. Thank them for being honest, even if it's hard to hear. And then keep praying for God to show what actions your church can take next. For a list of suggestions, download our Sensory Overload and Worship Talking Points. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.